There is a cast iron skillet in my grandmother's kitchen that has not been washed with soap in 40 years. I am not being careless about this. She was not being careless about it. The skillet has been seasoned, built up over decades of cooking in animal fat, to a surface so smooth and so naturally non-stick that it performs better than any coated pan manufactured in the last 50 years. The fat that built that surface is not in most American kitchens anymore. Not because it stopped working, not because something better replaced it. Because an industry decided in the 1960s and 1970s that vegetable oil was the modern choice and animal fat was the old-fashioned one. And because the science that supported that decision turned out to be substantially wrong in ways that took decades to fully acknowledge. The skillet is still there. The fat that built it is mostly gone. This is where it went, and why it matters more than most people realize. In 1950, the average American household cooked with one of four fats: lard, butter, bacon drippings, tallow. All four were animal fats. All four had been in American kitchens since before anyone alive could remember. All four produced specific results that the fats which replaced them have never fully replicated. By 1980, most American households had replaced all four with vegetable oil and vegetable shortening. The replacement was marketed as a health improvement. The science behind the marketing was industry-funded, selectively presented, and eventually substantially revised. The trans fats in the hydrogenated vegetable shortening that replaced lard turned out to be significantly more harmful than the saturated animal fat they displaced. The American Heart Association, which had endorsed the switch, later reversed its position on trans fats. But by the time the reversal happened, the animal fats were gone from most kitchens. The cast iron skillets that had been seasoned with them were in attics.
The knowledge of how to use them, what temperature to use for what purpose, how to save drippings, how to render lard at home, had not been passed to the next generation because the next generation had been told they did not need it. This video is about the four fats that built the American kitchen and what happened when they left. Before we go through all four, subscribe to the channel and leave a like. I cover the forgotten food traditions of American grandmothers every day. The things that worked before the food industry convinced everyone to do it differently. Hit the bell. Now let's start with the one that left first. Fat one. Lard. Lard is rendered pig fat, specifically the fat from around the kidneys and loin of the pig, called leaf lard, which produces the purest, most neutral-flavored lard with the highest smoke point. It has been the primary cooking fat of the American kitchen since the colonial period. What lard does that vegetable oil does not? Pie crust. This is the one that pastry chefs still argue about, and the evidence consistently favors lard. The fat crystals in lard are larger than those in butter, and significantly larger than those in vegetable shortening. Larger fat crystals create more distinct, more separate layers in the dough. The result is a crust that is genuinely flaky in a way that shortening crust is not. Flaky means the layers separate on the fork. Shortening crust breaks. These are different textures, and anyone who grew up eating pie made with lard knows immediately which one is which. Frying. Lard has a smoke point of approximately 370 to 375 degrees Fahrenheit for leaf lard, and somewhat lower for other grades. More importantly, lard is stable at high heat in a way that many vegetable oils are not. Polyunsaturated vegetable oils oxidize when heated. They produce free radicals and other compounds that are not present in stable animal fats heated to the same temperature. Fried food cooked in lard absorbs less fat than fried food cooked in vegetable oil because lard's high saturation creates a faster surface seal on the food. The result is food that is crisper, less greasy, and produced with a more stable fat. Biscuits. The southern biscuit, the kind that tears open to show a soft, layered interior, requires a solid fat with large crystals. Lard produces this. Shortening produces an approximation. Butter produces a different but also acceptable result. Vegetable oil produces a biscuit that is dense and cakey rather than flaky and layered. The lard can disappeared from American kitchens between approximately 1960 and 1980, driven by 1. The vegetable oil industry's funding of research associating saturated fat with cardiovascular disease, beginning with Ansel Keys' 7-country study in 1958, and its subsequent influence on dietary guidelines. 2. The marketing of Crisco and other hydrogenated vegetable shortenings as cleaner, more modern, more scientific alternatives to animal fat. 3. The cultural association of lard with poverty and old-fashionedness that the marketing campaigns deliberately cultivated. The science behind the campaign against lard has been substantially revised. The 7-country study has been criticized for selection bias. Keys had data from 22 countries and selected 7 that supported his hypothesis. The trans fats in the hydrogenated vegetable shortening that replaced lard are now classified by the FDA as no longer generally recognized as safe. The saturated fat in lard has not been shown to increase cardiovascular risk in the ways originally claimed. Lard is still available at specialty butchers, at Latin grocery stores where it never went away, and increasingly at standard supermarkets as the research has shifted. But the knowledge of how to use it, which applications require it, how to handle it, how to render it from fat back at home, was not preserved in most kitchens. A pound of lard costs approximately $2. A pound of butter costs $5 to $7. The pie crust that lard makes is better. Fat 2. Butter. Butter did not disappear from American kitchens the way lard did, but it was dramatically reduced, pushed to a secondary role as a flavoring rather than a primary cooking fat by the margarine campaign that ran from the 1950s through the 1980s. The American grandmother of 1952 cooked with butter in applications where its specific flavor was part of the dish. She made roux for white sauce with butter. She finished vegetables in butter. She made cakes with butter because butter flavor in a cake is not replaceable by anything else. She browned butter for cookies and for certain pan sauces. She did not use margarine. Margarine was a wartime substitute that had persisted into peacetime through aggressive marketing. The arguments for margarine were the same as the arguments against lard. Saturated fat, cardiovascular risk, modern versus old-fashioned. The science was the same. Substantially industry-funded, selectively presented, eventually revised. Margarine contains trans fats in its original hydrogenated form. Butter does not. The health case for replacing butter with margarine was not supported by the evidence as it developed. But the replacement happened anyway, at scale, for 2 decades. The butter that stayed in American kitchens was used less freely than before. Portion sizes became smaller, because the cultural narrative said butter was dangerous. Recipes that had called for generous amounts of butter were revised to use less. The flavor changed. The texture changed. And when the science shifted and butter came back, the recipes had already been altered, and the instinct for using it generously had already been trained out of a generation of cooks. The American grandmother of 1952 used butter without anxiety. She knew what it did, and she used enough of it to do the job. That relationship with butter, confident, generous, purposeful, is what was lost more than anything else.
Fat 3. Bacon drippings. The small tin or ceramic crock beside the stove, present in every American kitchen from the colonial period through approximately 1970. Bacon was cooked, the fat rendered into the pan. The pan was tilted and the drippings were poured through a small strainer or a piece of cheesecloth into the crock. The crock went back beside the stove. The drippings were used over the following 2 weeks for everything that required fat in the pan. This was not a health practice. It was not a trend. It was simply what you did with the bacon fat because throwing it away would have been wasteful, and because it made everything taste better. What bacon drippings specifically do? Green beans. The 1950s American green bean, slow cooked with a piece of fat back or with a spoonful of bacon drippings, tastes like something. It has a depth of flavor that is specific to rendered pork fat, with its particular compound profile. No other fat produces this specific flavor. Olive oil produces a different flavor. Butter produces a different flavor. Vegetable oil produces no flavor. Cornbread. The cast iron skillet heated with bacon drippings before the batter goes in produces a cornbread with a crust, a dark, crisp, fatty bottom crust that is not produced by any other method. The fat in the hot skillet creates an immediate sear on the batter that sets the crust before the bread has time to stick. Eggs. Eggs fried in bacon drippings taste different from eggs fried in butter, and significantly different from eggs fried in vegetable oil. The smoke compounds in the rendered bacon fat flavor the egg from the outside as it cooks. The result is the diner egg of 1955, the one that people who ate it in childhood remember clearly and have spent decades trying to replicate. The practice of saving drippings required only a container and the habit of saving rather than pouring down the drain. The cost was negative. The drippings were a byproduct of bacon that would otherwise be wasted. The flavor they added to everything they touched was specific and irreplaceable. The practice was abandoned because the narrative around animal fat made saving the drippings seem unhealthy or old-fashioned. The container was thrown out. The habit was lost. The flavor went with it. It is recoverable. The container costs $1. The bacon is already being cooked. The habit is the only thing that needs to be rebuilt. Fat 4. Tallow. Tallow is rendered beef fat, specifically the fat from around the kidneys, called suet, which produces the purest and most stable form. It was used in American kitchens primarily for high-heat frying and for certain baked goods, and it was the fat that McDonald's used for its French fries until 1990. The McDonald's French fry, cooked in beef tallow from the 1960s through 1990, is one of the most consistently cited examples in American food culture of a specific flavor that was lost when the fat changed. Food writers have described it. Chefs have tried to replicate it. The company has not returned to it. The reason the tallow fry tasted the way it did is chemistry. Beef tallow contains a specific flavor compound profile that develops during high-heat cooking. Compounds from the Maillard reaction interacting with the particular fatty acid composition of tallow that no vegetable oil has replicated because no vegetable oil has the same fatty acid composition. The flavor is built into the fat. McDonald's switched to vegetable oil in 1990 under pressure from the Center for Science in the Public Interest, which had campaigned against the use of saturated fat. The switch was marketed as a health improvement. The vegetable oil McDonald's switched to was partially hydrogenated. It contained trans fats. The trans fats were later identified as more harmful than the tallow they replaced. McDonald's eventually removed the trans fats from its oil formulation. The fry got worse twice. Once when the tallow was removed, and once when the trans fat was removed. Both times, the change was presented as a health improvement. Tallow, like lard, is increasingly available again.
specialty butchers, online suppliers, and home rendering from beef fat purchased at the butcher counter. The knowledge of how to use it at home for high-heat cooking is recoverable. The flavor of the dish cooked in it is specific and not available from any other fat. I want to be direct about something. The campaign against animal cooking fats that ran from roughly 1960 through 1990 was not primarily a science-based public health initiative. It was primarily an industry campaign, funded by the vegetable oil and margarine industries that used selectively presented science to shift consumer behavior at a scale and speed that genuine scientific consensus rarely achieves. The result was the replacement of 4 stable, functional, historically proven cooking fats with products that turned out, in the case of partially hydrogenated vegetable shortening and margarine, to contain a category of fat, trans fats, now recognized as genuinely harmful to cardiovascular health. The American Heart Association endorsed margarine. The AHA later reversed its position on trans fats. The animal fats that were displaced have not been shown to cause the cardiovascular harm originally claimed. The meta-analyses that have examined the original studies, including Key's 7-country study, have found significant methodological problems. None of this is to say that animal fats are a health food. They are cooking fats. They should be used as cooking fats, in appropriate quantities for the applications they are suited to. But the replacement of lard with Crisco was not a health improvement. It was a marketing victory. And the flavor, the texture, and the specific results that animal fats produce in cooking were real losses. Losses that most American kitchens have never fully recovered from, because the knowledge of how to use those fats was not preserved during the decades when the marketing said it was not needed. My grandmother's cast iron skillet is the evidence. 40 years of animal fat built into the surface of the iron. Nothing sticks. Everything tastes correct. How to bring them back. This is practical. All 4 of these fats are recoverable without difficulty. Lard. Available at specialty butchers, Latin grocery stores, and online. Leaf lard, from around the kidneys, is the best quality. Standard lard from the supermarket baking aisle works for most applications. Store in the refrigerator for months or in the freezer indefinitely. Use for pie crust, biscuits, frying, and any application where you want a neutral fat with a high smoke point and good stability. Butter. Already in most kitchens. Use it more confidently and more generously in applications where its flavor is part of the dish. Brown it for cookies and pan sauces. Use it to finish vegetables. Make roux with it. The anxiety about butter that was cultivated through 4 decades of anti-saturated fat messaging is not supported by the current evidence base. Bacon drippings. Start saving them. A glass jar with a lid beside the stove. Strain the drippings through a fine mesh strainer after cooking bacon. Store at room temperature for 2 weeks or refrigerate for longer. Use for frying eggs, seasoning cast iron, cooking green beans, greasing the cornbread pan. The cost is negative. The flavor is specific and irreplaceable. Tallow. The most involved to source and use, but available from specialty butchers and online. Render suet at home by cutting it into small pieces and heating slowly in a low oven until the fat melts and the solids can be strained out. The rendered tallow keeps at room temperature for months. Use for high heat frying where a stable fat with a high smoke point and specific flavor is wanted. The cast iron skillet, seasoned with any of these fats over time, develops the surface that my grandmother's has. It takes months of regular use. It lasts generations. 4 fats. Lard for pie crust and biscuits and frying.
butter for flavor and finishing and baking, bacon drippings for the flavor that is specific to rendered pork fat and not available from anything else, tallow for high-heat frying and the specific Maillard compounds that develop in beef fat. All four were in American kitchens in 1950. All four were largely gone by 1980. Not because they stopped working, because an industry decided they should be gone and spent the money to make that happen. The science that justified the replacement was wrong in significant ways. The replacement fats turned out to contain genuinely harmful compounds. The flavors and textures produced by the original fats have not been replicated by what replaced them. The cast iron skillet that has not been washed with soap in 40 years is the evidence that something was working and that something was preserved through the decades when the marketing said it should be thrown out. Leave a comment below and tell me, did you grow up in a kitchen that saved bacon drippings? Did your grandmother cook with lard? Do you remember the specific taste of something cooked in animal fat that no version cooked in vegetable oil has ever quite replicated? Tell me what you remember. Those specific food memories are exactly what this channel is here to document. Like the video if the history of how these fats left surprised you. Subscribe for more of this every day. Grandma figured this out before breakfast.